here are the four major reasons that I encourage people that it's probably time to move on. Okay. The first is a change in sense of call. And this type of thing only comes as you are deeply in the Word, as you are deeply kind of wrestling through and constantly in communion with God, the Holy Spirit, to be able to talk about where you are in ministry. But there are times when we have a change in our sense of call. I remember for me, I was a youth pastor for 8 years, Todd. And one summer, I was on a water slide, hurtling down the water slide at breakneck speed. And I just really came to the sense at that point that I was too old for this, and it was time for me to move on into a different role. And so if anybody has HBO Max and wants to go and watch Class Action Park, that's actually where that water slide was. And if you watch that documentary, you will understand it, though it's on HBO, which I don't know if Christians are allowed to watch HBO. So I probably just revealed too much about myself. There are seasons where our sense of call changes. I decided that it was time for me to move on. And the more I prayed about it, the more I realized that God was calling me to go plant a church. Instead of being a youth pastor. What we would encourage you to do is be attentive, be listening to if there is a change of call going on, and to respond to that. Now, here's one thing to kind of keep in mind. Okay, we'll have conversations from time to time with churches who a youth pastor realizes that their calling is changing and it's no longer student ministry, and they just assume that their church is going to make room for that sense of call, in that next season. That doesn't always happen. A lot of times, Todd, when your call changes, that many times means that it's time to move on from your church, because they may or may not have room for you to be able to step in and pursue that new sense of call. That doesn't mean that they don't value you. That doesn't mean that they don't love you. That probably has more to do with some of the practical realities of ministry, in that they need to be able to they need a youth pastor more than they need somebody that's going to do small groups and maybe teach 26 times a year. So understand that as that change of call takes place, sometimes that means that you're moving on. On occasion, you can stay in your same church. That's been your experience, right, Todd?
Yeah, for sure. We were just talking to a pastor yesterday that said, one of the current people on his team feels called to preach more and probably eventually be a senior pastor. And he's like, we love the guy, but we don't have that role here right now. So we're giving him freedom to be able to go out and find something else that's a little bit more in tune with where God's calling him to go for this next season. So yeah, absolutely. God can definitely change kind of your heart and your mind and where you're at and where you've been for this next season. And just because that doesn't fit where you are, that might be actually part of that whole transition, what we're talking about, where God's kind of moving your heart toward the ability to, or the availability to move on to something different.